everybody. Thank you for coming to this presentation. I'm François Durutti. I work at Sequoia and have been for 4 years now, and I run the threat intelligence team, and I'm with Felix. Felix, who is an analyst, I'm an analyst, and I work on threat intel, more technical rather than geopolitical in the TDR team. And today we're going to show you a disinfection operation we did on a former Chinese worm. We're going to go through the technical background and the different authorities, European and French, and then present the outcome of the story, how it all started, what we did, what results we obtained, and we hope you will find this interesting. There'll be questions and answers at the end. I don't know if we need the full 45 minutes, but we will see. So let's go. So, it all began with a malware called PlugX. Some of you will have heard of PlugX. The grandfather of Chinese malware associated, MSS linked in cyber espionage, and is something which has been around for 15 years. I think it started in 2012 in Mongolia. It was used, reused and reused, and today it is still used after some 15 years. There's been all sorts of variants of this malware, but we still have it in our networks, despite the fact that at TDR we have trackers, etc. We still see it being used in cyber espionage campaigns. So for the technical aspect, what differentiates it from other malware is that this DLL sideloading, which is that you have a registrant, you might have a binary of Microsoft or something else, and its execution is taken over by the system, it's trusted by the system, but it loads a malicious DLL, which will in turn upload this encrypted payload. And so we deal this with the malicious DLL or the payload which is encrypted when it is really encrypted. And then one day, there were some Chinese operators, Mustang Panda, who had the brilliant idea of combining the plague and cholera. And so they thought, we'll use this perfectly normal vector for compromising information systems with some commands of type execution, uploading, downloading of files, addition of register keys. And we're going to modify it and make it a worm. We're going to make it a side door. Before, it wasn't installed automatically. The victim had to visit a website, or here they made a worm, which means that it spreads automatically. And how does it spread? It's quite simple. When PlugX is executed, it lists the USB drives, and it installs on them, infects them, and when that drive is then connected to another PC, you get the icon for the USB, you double-click on it, and in fact it's not the drive you're opening, it's PlugX that you are executing to infect the computer. And so it spreads from one USB drive to another. And today we have a lot of computers which are compromised around the world. So why use these USB drives to spread? The idea is that they wanted to probably to attack a government which had one or several partition networks, and we're going to get them through these USB drives. That these networks, as they're not connected to internet, it's not easy to get in there, so we'll do something that infects the USB drives. And the particularity of this worm is that exfiltration is also done via the drive. So if you are on the network, it recovers all the interesting files from the computer, copies them onto the drive, and that is exfiltrated when it is put into a computer that is connected to internet, and then sends it to the C2. The C2 is the command and control server, and that's what we identified in this investigation. So Mustang Panda is well known, working a lot in diplomacy, and we think, which is really focused on the Silk Roads, the new Silk Roads, strategically. And this whole story, this whole adventure began. Every day we monitor internet, and the aim is to enrich the reports with the information we find and to feed our threat intelligence with some exclusive information, but from open sources. And one day I was in Paris, I was drinking a coffee, and I saw this article from Wired on this worm, and this article mentioned an IP, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. We'll do something we've never tried before. I'm going to try my luck and try to get the IP. This is what we generally call sinkholing, when the domain expires and when we have good contacts, which means that we can get the domain. For an IP address, it's more complicated than for a domain. And there's an article from Sophos next to it which says, we've seen this worm in Mongolia. I can't remember which other country, Nigeria. And I was going to say Lesotho, but it's not that. Next to South Africa, Zimbabwe, that's it. And we've seen it in this small number of countries. So we have Mustang Panda, who in 2020 had this brilliant idea of adding a wormable component to PlugX. And we saw that it was created, they put it out in the networks, and 1 month later, this C2 server, which was sending the commands to the malware, was switched off by the operators. We don't exactly know why. Either they were victims of their success, and the malware spread all over the world, and the server was suffered a DDoS by the number of users trying to connect, or it's just that they had done what they had intended to do. They were quite happy and decided to drop the server. And so the idea here was to say, right, we're going to try to recover this IP and see who's still connecting to it. Are there still victims around the world who are logging in? So there was this phrase, we saw C2 activity reaching out to this IP address. So what I did was very quickly, I did a scan and map just to ping the IP address and to see whether the ping wasn't blocked and whether the host was up or not. And there we found there was no answer to the ping, there was no open port. So I used ChatGPT. It might not have been chat, but I think I tried to write a message in English. I'm a security researcher. I want this IP address. I explain why. But I'm not sure they really care. And very interesting here, and in several investigations we've been able to do this, that we got an answer, okay. It's not used by any clients, so we can supply the IP address to you, and it cost me the huge amount of $7 to get the IP, to get a virtual machine with this IP address. So, I connected, and so I launched the HTTP server to see the number of requests, and there were about 1,000 a second coming through. Do you want to continue? So what we did after this, it was good to have the IP addresses of the requests, but ideally we wanted to do mapping of the victims, and so using a DevOps that we have, I looked up with the interface, the databases, and we did this mapping of all the countries which were infected, 170 countries, including countries I've never heard of, 170 countries around the world which were sending requests, with a large portion of that from Nigeria, China, Iran, the US, and I can't read the other names there. But we had a lot of victims, and we consider that even though here we see about 2,295,000, we estimate that there are about 100,000 IP addresses where it's really something, the threat is persistent, where it hasn't been bothered by an antivirus, so which are compromised, about 100,000 networks which are compromised. I'll continue. What's interesting here is that very quickly we realize, when we look at the mapping of the countries, that there are a lot of very infected countries that are close to straits or to strategic points, those red circles, but also quite a few countries where there's a lot of Chinese investments. So there can be two biases here. Obviously, China invests all over the world, so that's quite logical. The second bias is that we're coming a few years after the beginning of the worm, so it has had time to spread around the world. So there is a bias there of limited confirmation, even though the worm spreads alone and may have infected many countries in Africa, unfortunately, because we don't have the mature security teams there on that continent, and so it's perhaps there that we find it more often. And so I woke up one day and thought, this is great, we've got a sinkhole, let's push this a bit further. And we're going to see whether we can disinfect the computers that are connecting remotely. We have the C2, the command and control server. I asked Charles, who's in the room there, who's our advisor, whether you can tell me whether the encryption of the data is something we can break, if it's something where we really can send commands to the victims, and then we'll see whether there are any disinfection commands. And we realized that the encryption of the communication PlugX was RC4 or something with a key that was shared between the C2 and the client. But as the key could be deduced, all the clients had the same key because the worm is spread. It's always the same. They're clones, so it's always the same encryption key. So we could send whatever we wanted to all the clients and to all the infected machines. And here we had two options. The first was that we could send a disinfection command. PlugX has a sort of disinfection command which makes it possible to remove PlugX from the computer. And the problem is it's still on the drive, so if somebody plugs it in again, it'll be reinfected. And then we thought we could try to push this a bit further, and it was Charles who developed this, with the idea of how about we send a disinfection command and we even disinfect the flash drive if it's plugged in. Although here we don't know what files are on it. You also have to restore the right files in the right places because the files are hidden by the worm. When the person opens the flash drive, they just see the drive and not their files, and so they click on PlugX. So you have to restore the files to their initial shape. That's complicated, doable, but complicated.
So, to sum up, we have a complete mapping of the infected countries. We identify the way to send disinfection on the PC or the flash drives, and then we wonder how can we implement that. On our side, we discuss with the different authorities what can we implement to try and address those equipment that have to be disinfected. We can't do everything ourselves, we're not cowboys. We spent a lot of time at the ANSSI, the French National Cybersecurity Agency, explain what's the payload. We have effects that need to be kept in check. For example, we don't want an hospital to go down when we disinfect. So Felix and the TDR team developed a portal where we provide to French authorities to disinfect French compromised equipment in France, but also to other countries to upload the equipment so that we can detect and identify which IPs in those countries are needs disinfection. And so I go straight, but some want to identify victims that are behind those IPs that are infected. Yeah, we want to. I will describe the video. It's not working. Thank you, Felix. So we let each authority choose how they want the disinfection to go, on which scale they want this disinfection. So we put in all the IP addresses. Yeah. So I know what I do because it's not in my origin country, homeland. So this is an IP of a virtual machine that were infected. This is Charles running the demonstration. He executes PlugX on a controlled environment. We see through wire charts the malware detects a disinfection payload, and we send a log where we see that the campaign, there was a disinfection campaign that was run, and I sent a vaccine to this IP address. That was our virtual PC. So the counter goes to 1. So we had it lasted 1 week, the process. Now we're ready, and now begins a long fight, maybe, or at least a lot of meetings that needed to be convened. I would like to thank the French authorities that helped us. We are partners and members of Europol, and so we have support from the French authorities, from Europol, that allow us to present our work to other authorities, other countries. We need to reassure people. We have to prove that the payload will have no impact on the infrastructures. We work with the judicial teams from Europol and also the cybersecurity agencies from all those countries, and we wanted every country to take part in this campaign. So we discuss quite easily with France, for example, because there is a legal background with laws, but some are more exotic and come to us, and it's a bit more complicated. We would have liked to disinfect parts of the world like Nigeria, but they have not. Their network and their network security are not sufficiently mature. And as a small private team, it's complicated. This product, we created it in 2020. It's already a success that we have results. And so I highlighted that we had the chance of benefiting from the FBI's contribution. We had 34 countries that asked for the single logs. They wanted to learn every IPs that were infected on their networks. It wasn't just the files that were joined attached to an email. They had a complete report. Then we had 24 countries that wanted to be involved in the disinfection process. We see that the number is going down. And then the countries that were really involved, that used the portal or gave France, that permitted France to use the portal to access their networks. We had 60,000 payloads that were sent for disinfection, and only 5,000 devices were disinfected. This process was very interesting for us, and we wanted to share this part. We had a lot of discussion on who presses the button for this process. And we are glad that we had this common success within Europe, but also with Singapore that were happy to be involved. Maybe they don't have the necessary agreement protocols to work with France, or they didn't have the time to create them. But the responsibility and the accountability is a big issue. So for $7, when we did the reverse to disinfect a network, at the end of the process, the unit, the package that is disinfected is not that big. So how can we improve in this aspect, and how can we share the process with on a scale that goes beyond Europe? It's been 2 days that I've been here. The environment evolves quickly, so during the 2 days that I was here, I felt like I missed out on a lot of things.
I think we finished for the presentation, and we're at your disposal if you have any questions. In this framework, there wasn't much risk in this operation, but there already have been disinfection operations with very large edge effects. We didn't want to take the risk. I think we would have drawn criticism because countries do look at what's going on and do interception. I think if we'd been sending disinfection all over the world, that might have caused some problems. But once we've done the reverse, we see it's an official command from the malware, so we know it's going to work, but that's not enough to be covered in case something does go wrong, or to cover the responsibility of our company. So we have countries that contacted us afterwards. So obviously a project stops at one point. We operated this for 6 months. There are countries where there are mandates which are for a limited time, and after a while you can't go further. Those who contacted us afterwards, we sent them the process, including for disinfecting the flash drive. So we provide them with the ability to do it, to stop it spreading. But today, with our disinfection process, they could start up again very quickly. We're a long way from having eradicated this threat. And of all the countries that took part in the operation, they chose option 1, which is with the disinfection command. They could have taken option 2, but they wanted to avoid any edge effects. But it's a good proof of concept and can be used for other operations. The portal was designed to be reused for another operation with other types of command, other types of malware, but the structure of the malware and the possibility to offer it to different countries with their own logins was designed for use on other malware later. There's none, but I expected to have this sort of remark, or even a private team that might come and see how we did this. There are other command and control servers, very probably, and certain authorities put us in contact with other Strat Intel teams who had other IPs or with other versions of PlugX, so we have been able to establish connections with other teams working on this. We didn't have access to the compromised machines, and these are logs. The first compromised machines were in 2021, so we wouldn't see anything. We would need to go to Nigeria to see. I think it really is Nigeria, which was the first target, but we can't know that. We have had confirmation from authorities that have worked on this, and so either they stopped because they achieved their objective, or they stopped because it was too successful and the server couldn't handle it. Totally. When I did the presentation to Europol, that was the risk. There were the US. The US was in the room. Might this worm not be a playground for the NSA? We know that piggybacking exists between modus operandi. It infects China a lot, and countries like Iran and others. Might they not be using it? Might the US not be using it? And might we not be getting in the way of their operations? We can never know that, but it is quite possible at different levels. There's the telco level, but also if they could do attacks on data centers or things like that. And it can also be reused by cyber criminals. With PlugX, we see 2 million connections, but generally, PlugX can be disinfected by antivirus systems, but after a period of time. But anybody who else can deploy a stealer, not on 100,000 machines, but on quite a lot of machines. So it could be used. And again, we can't hear the question, I'm sorry, so we don't know.
Voilà. Non, mais il était dormant.
It was dormant. Because the operator has to say, okay, exfiltrate the data from the flash drives to be able to exfiltrate that. And as we never sent commands other than the disinfection command, we never received that data. But that data may be being sent elsewhere without us knowing it. So the link with Mustang Panda came from the randomization of DLL exports. In fact, there's garbage. There are export names which are not normal, and all the Mustang Panda PlugX DLLs have this anomaly, and that's how we can track them easily. And for the exfiltration, just to come back to the question of the compromised assets, etc., on our C2, I created a fourth-party trap, which is that if I received data which we hadn't sent, like a response to a request we had never sent, that would have meant somebody was on the line and sending a command. We did have some anomalies, but nothing that was ever conclusive. But there were some clear anomalies. And the server was blacklisted. And we went saying, look, for several months we've been cooperating with the authorities on this. You should avoid reallocating this server to clients, and apparently they blacklisted. I hope they really do it. But they were very pleasant and really cooperative and not expensive. So it can be re-infection. It can also be VPN nodes where there are quite a few compromised IP addresses via the same VPN. And then there's also networks which with the HTTP headers. So we had several workstations in networks which were compromised. So there's a big difference, but it can also be explained because there's still a lot of USB flash drives which are compromised, which are dormant or still connected, plugged in somewhere. And the problem there is the antivirus aspect. And it's a big problem because we can't really disinfect the flash drives, otherwise they'll no longer have access to their files because they're hidden. And that's the question. What do we do in that case? There are lots of compromised USB flash drives out there. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, we're going to thank you for your attention and hope you enjoy the rest of the trade show. Thank you.